to there. Once again. From there to there. Once again. To there to there.
Welcome to the Inquiry 2.0. Today, a fascinating look at John Awesome Anderson, a guy who was the toughest doorman in the 80s without question. And he kept those clubs and bars as safe as possible by taking out some of the toughest men in Coventry, which was the toughest and roughest city in the UK within the 80s, and was even, I think, up there as one of the most violent cities in Europe. And this guy was a mentor to Geoff Thompson. You may have read his book, but if you've not, there's a link in the description. And this chapter is Geoff Thompson talking about John Anderson when he took on this rugby player who was 20 stone, massive neck, man-mountain, had a reputation for just chinning everyone in every bar he went to. Terrible bully. And John Anderson has a situation in this chapter by Geoff Thompson where he's got to go one-on-one with him. So with that being said, smash the likes out there for me and let's get stuck into this brilliant chapter. The man who couldn't be knocked out. 20 inches of neck attached to a freakish body, the likes of which are not usually seen outside the pages of a Neanderthal monthly, with tree trunk legs and splaying arms carrying invisible buckets of water, walked into Buster's nightclub. With a permanent frown on his armour-plated forehead, he paid for his entrance and thudded towards the bar, barging a path through crowds of people. The man was a walking truck that liked to play professional rugby and eat babies. John Awesome Anderson made a mental note as he walked past. Instinct told him that he'd be fighting with this man before the end of the night. Sometimes you can just tell. Cameron, another rugby player of 6'2" and 210 pounds, approached John. "Know who that is?" he asked John. John drew on his cigarette and felt the adrenaline warm into his stomach. He shook his head as though to say, "Don't know, don't care," though he knew he was going to be told anyway. "That's Trevor. He's a monster on the rugby field. He's the man that can't be knocked out." John raised his eyebrows as though to say, "Now there's a challenge." I was doing okay on the door. I was even starting to get a bit of a name for myself, but John was still the main man. He was the buck stop we all looked for when a situation outweighed or outlead us. People like Trevor were, in a way, bouncers bogeymen. People who didn't care how well you fought, how strong your rep, how big you were, or even if you had a face like 10 boxers, they wanted to fight you. They were not in the least intimidated by any doorman. With these types, all the concepts were used for avoiding a physical response. Avoidance, escape, dissuasion, loopholing were exhausted before we even started. The long and the short of it was, they wanted to fight you, and you either fought or you abandoned ship. You had a choice, be the hammer or the anvil. I remember well the incident with old 20 Neck, the rugby player that couldn't be knocked out, because he was one of the epitome of every villain, of every bully that every doorman in the country had faced at least once in their career. On the nightclub scene, 20 Neck was pretty famous, and on the rugby field, the lad was a legend. He frequented most of the city nightclubs and intimidated the punters and the door staff wherever he went. As with many rugby players, no disrespect intended to the nicer players out there, this guy liked to drink and liked to fight, usually in that order, and was one of the most frightening people I've ever seen. 20 Neck was stood at the bar like he paid the rent and was with a few of his Klingons. Everyone in the room hated him and all stood in fear of what he was capable of doing. He started playing up, intimidating other customers and stealing their drinks. He also refused to pay for a beer that he'd ordered and consumed and kept touching up the female customers. You know, the usual rugby player crack. He'd also butted her at it by the bar for getting served before him. After several complaints, a couple of the doormen had gone to the bar to try and sort the situation out. When they told 20 Neck he had to leave, he just laughed in their faces. "Whenever you're ready to get me out, just let me know," he told them. The lads were a little psyched out, I have to say. Unsure where to take the situation from here, one of the boys went to reception for John and filled him in on the details. John already knew that he was going to be fighting, so he took off his jacket and made his way to the bar. Muscles that you don't get out of the catalogue rippled through the white cotton sleeves. "Why haven't you got rid of the problem?" John asked as he paced towards the bar. The doorman thought for a second. "Well, he just said that he wasn't going." "You boys should have dealt with it," he said. "Too late now. I'll deal with it." John spoke as though he was talking about an overdue bill or some inanimate problem that had to be resolved. They knew they should have dealt with it themselves, but they'd allowed 20 neck to dominate and had been psyched out as a consequence. It happens. That's what the head doorman is there for. The buck stops with him. I don't know a single doorman that hasn't at some time or other been psyched out by a personal situation like this. 20 neck stood twice as wide as John, well, twice as wide as every man in the room, actually. He smirked when John approached as if to say, "This is your head man?" He made one of those smarmy smiles that says, "You've got more chance of moving a mountain." He made the same mistake that many big men had with John. In clothes, he looked pretty ordinary, inconspicuous even, stocky, but not so much so that you take notice. Underneath was a different matter. The man was hugely muscular, with rippling biceps and a back that was layers deep. He could bench press 400 pounds and curl in excess of 220. Add to this the fact that John could punch like a pro boxer and had an iron will, forged from the adversity of several hundred encounters with the city's best and worst, and you had a bundle of woe. John was all maim and pain. 20 neck had definitely read the cover on this book wrong. "So what's the problem then?" John's voice was emotionless and to the point. He drew back on his cigarette and flicked it at the feet of 20 neck. "I don't have a problem. The problem's all yours. I think you better leave." "I'm not leaving, and you're not big enough to make me." He smiled and turned back to his beer, as though he rated John so little that he didn't even warrant eye contact. All eyes were on John and the space that he occupied. Everyone at the bar area stopped to watch the spectacle. John hid the effects of adrenaline with expert ease. He leaned back onto his right foot and tapped his left to the beat of the music. This hides the adrenal shake that the major thigh muscles that tells an observant opponent you're feeling it. He gripped his voice and talked in low, controlled tones to hide the voice quiver that spells panic from 100 yards. On the outside, he looked like a rock, immovable and undaunted. John was a master of the game, but inside I knew he was feeling it the same as every man who ever had a fight. His adrenaline would have been racing around his veins. His inner opponent, the voice of instinct, would have been gnawing away, telling him to flee for his very life from this prehistoric beast. Most people watching would have seen a head doorman telling a freak neck to leave the premises. When I watched John, I looked deeper because I had stood in this man's shoes and faced many monsters, just like the one he faced now. What I saw was a captain of self-control, a man with the strength to override his own instincts, and not only that, but to be as cool as Snowman's bollocks in the process. John's cool, confused 20 neck, who still hadn't mastered the art of stringing sentences together. Every other mortal he dealt with in the past had worn their fear like a thorny crown. John was different. He displays no outward signs of fear. In fact, he looked as though he didn't give a monkey's F. Every man and woman at the bar seemed to hold their breath in unison, anticipating the battle that must surely ensue. They had never seen anyone stand up to this bullying monster before, and though they wanted to see his blood spill, they found it hard to believe that he was beatable. John knew before the approach that by reputation the guy was going to need careful handling. His pre-fight strategy had to be played just right if he was going to take him out. He already knew that an amicable settlement was an impossibility, and that violence was well and truly on the cards. But that was John's game. What he had learned over the years and what he knew was this: the art of winning a fight was not in what physical tools one employed, rather it's about pre-fight strategy, the 3 seconds before physical combat. The man that controlled this would be the one who walked away with the accolades. In this case, the scalp of 20 neck. "I think you better make your way out the club," John said. As he spoke, he grabbed the left hand of 20 neck with his own right hand and gave a gentle tug, as though trying to take his glass away from him. In reply, 20 neck violently yanked his hand away. John was testing the waters. He had long since taken note of the half-empty beer mug in his hand, and knew from the many glassings that he had witnessed in the past just what damage a piece like that could do in the hands of intent. "You want me out? You take me out." The interview was over. They stared into each other's eyes for what seemed like a lifetime. The air was electric and the circle of people around them widened in anticipation. They wanted to watch, but not to be so close as to catch one should a loose cannon fire in their direction. What John had gauged from the speak and the pull were two things. Firstly, in these split seconds, he had evaluated that the guy was not going to leave without a fight. It had to be a fight because he was too big and strong to try restraints. And secondly, that when the glass in his right hand was touched, he pulled back to his own right. This opened a window for the left hook. He liked left hooks. "You've got to go, mate." As the words left the lips, John moved his right hand forward and touched the glass again, using the same speak to engage the brain of his opponent. Engaging the brain wasn't a problem. This was a guy that still scratched his head at the milk on the doorstep every morning. This time he deliberately allowed a little hesitancy to creep into his voice to disarm his man mentally. As before, 20 next sharply pulled back to his own right. Bang! It was a short left hook that travelled so fast it almost landed before it was thrown. It was so quick that a lot of the people didn't even see it. And because Colin was standing so close to John, when he fired the punch, many of the punchers thought he'd thrown it. Colin said nothing to convince them otherwise. The left hook probably only travelled 6 inches. The connection was one of the most violent on record, and the meathead hit the floor at 100 miles an hour. As he fell, his head smashed into the beer sticky carpet where his feet were just a second before. His big face shuddered, and he was out. He hit the floor so hard that the beer glasses bounced off the 3 nearest tables. The whole club fell silent, and incredibly, at one, they broke out into spontaneous applause. 20 net looked like a sleeping baby. Blood gushed from his face where John had smashed his side teeth through his cheek. It needed 20 stitches to put it back together. Colin smiled. He's leaving now then, John. Okay, hope you all enjoyed that. Fascinating characters. You can read more about them, watch more about them on YouTube. There's the old seminars that they used to do, and it was all about the art of street fighting and using those different martial arts, etc., and honing them to work on the street. Quite an interesting subject if you're into that type of thing. Of course, we're not condoning violence of any kind. We're looking at historic characters throughout crime or tough guys, hardman, bouncers, that type of thing. So if you enjoy it, hit the subscribe, hit the like, hit the notification, and I'll see you next time.